Potter story from another's perspective. Rowan Barrows and the Forgotten Prophecy. Chapter 10. Halloween. October was nearly over, and Hogwarts had begun to feel like home. Rowan had stopped getting lost in the endless corridors, mostly, and the staircases only caught him by surprise once or twice a week. The moving portraits no longer startled him, and even Peeves, who delighted in sneaking up behind first years, had lost some of his power to frighten him. The week began like most did, with Professor Sprout's cheery voice echoing through the greenhouse. The smell of damp earth and dragon dung filled the air as Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students potted fanged geraniums. Rowan's sleeves were rolled up, dirt streaking his cheeks, while Justin Finch Fletchley had somehow managed to cover his entire robe in soil. "You're meant to plant them, Justin, not wrestle them," Rowan said, laughing as Justin tried to shake compost from his hair. "It's the plant's fault," Justin muttered nervously. "It bit me." Professor Sprout bustled past, beaming. "A sign of healthy roots, Mr. Finch Fletchley. They only bite when they're thriving." After herbology came history of magic, which felt like the exact opposite of thriving. Professor Binns drifted back and forth at the front of the history of magic classroom, reciting dates in a voice so monotonous, Rowan was half convinced it could lull a banshee to sleep. Ollie had propped his chin on his hand and was fighting a losing battle with consciousness. By the time lunch arrived, even the pumpkin juice felt like salvation. The great hall buzzed with conversation, the air filled with the scent of roast chicken and gravy. Hufflepuffs clustered together at their long table, laughing and trading stories about misfired spells. After lunch came Defense Against the Dark Arts. Professor Quirrell's class. Rowan tried to pay attention, he really did, but it was difficult when the teacher kept stammering and jumping at his own shadow. When he brought out a jar containing a twitching something, no one could quite tell what. Half the class leaned forward eagerly while the other half leaned back. Lessons dragged more than usual that day. No one wanted to be in class, not when the promise of the Halloween feast at the end of the week hung over everything like a reward just out of reach. By the time afternoon came, the castle had grown louder, brighter, fuller. Students hurried through corridors in clusters, voices bouncing off the stone walls. Rowan and Ollie were making their way back toward the common room when they heard it. Laughter, sharp, unkind. They slowed. Up ahead, near an alcove by the staircase, a small group of 3 Slytherin boys had gathered. At their centre stood a pale, pointed figure Rowan recognised immediately. Draco Malfoy. Jack Cooper, Rowan's childhood Quidditch mate, stood opposite him. Rowan felt something twist in his chest. Jack looked smaller than usual, which said something because he was so tall, shoulders tight, hands clenched at his sides, trying very hard not to show it. "Go on then," Malfoy drawled, circling him lazily. "Show us. We heard you telling those Ravenclaws that you could beat anyone here in a duel." Jack swallowed. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "No?" Malfoy tilted his head. "Because from where I'm standing it looks like you can't prove anything at all." The other hulking Slytherin boys snickered. Ollie muttered under his breath, "Brilliant," in that sarcastic tone of his. Rowan didn't move. Jack pulled his wand out, just slightly, like he wasn't sure whether he meant to use it or not. "Leave me alone," he said, quieter now. Malfoy smiled, not kindly. "Careful," he said softly. "Wouldn't want you embarrassing yourself in front of everyone." One of the Slytherins laughed. That did it. Ollie stepped forward. "Maybe try picking on someone without your bodyguards to back you up." Rowan grabbed his sleeve. "Ollie?" Too late. Malfoy's eyes snapped toward them. Ollie stared straight back at him, unfazed. For a moment, everything stilled. The corridor felt tighter, quieter. Rowan stepped in before it could go further. "Leave it," he said, more firmly than he expected, remembering what his father had told him about staying away from the Malfoys. Malfoy looked at Rowan now, properly. There was something sharp in his gaze, measuring. "Another one," he said. "Hufflepuff's feeling brave today." Rowan held his ground. He didn't know why, but he didn't step back. For a long second, no one moved. Then, Malfoy gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Not worth it," he said, turning away. "Come on." The two hulking Slytherins followed, their laughter trailing behind them like smoke. The corridor exhaled. Jack didn't speak at first. He just stared at the floor. Then, "Thanks, Rowan. I had it handled, though," he muttered. Ollie raised an eyebrow. "Didn't look like it." Rowan shot him a look. Jack huffed. "I did." There was a pause, then quieter. "Thanks. I didn't mean to go running my mouth, you know me. I like to be the best at everything." Rowan nodded. "I know you do, but Malfoy's not worth it." Jack gave a small, humourless laugh. "Yeah, I'm starting to realise that. Thanks again, see you around." He walked away in the opposite direction. It was strange it felt like Rowan hadn't seen Jack in so long, even though they attended the same school. That evening, the Hufflepuff common room glowed warm with firelight. Rowan sat cross-legged by the hearth, finishing an essay for potions while Ollie taught Justin how to play Exploding Snap, that occasionally set his sleeve alight. The night of the astronomy lesson was bitingly cold. The wind swept around the tower, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the faint music of laughter drifting up from the great hall below. Rowan and Ollie huddled against the chill as they climbed the narrow stairs, their breath clouding before them. When they finally stepped out onto the tower's platform, this sight took Rowan's breath away. 1,000 stars wheeled above them, silver and sharp, while the black lake glimmered like ink far below. Professor Sinistra was already waiting, her dark cloak rippling in the wind. "Mark the position of Mars and Jupiter," she called, "and remember to label them correctly this time, Mr. Finch-Fletchley." Justin groaned as Ollie snorted into his scarf. "Every time," Ollie muttered, unpacking his telescope. "Every single time she picks on Justin. I think she enjoys it." They began noting the constellations, fingers numb and eyes watering. Ollie complained the entire time. "You know," he said, "I reckon this is some elaborate prank by the teachers. Freeze the first year's half to death." Rowan smiled faintly but said nothing. His thoughts were elsewhere. On the portrait he and Ollie had been forced to move for detention. The portrait of Doomsayer Doris now hung in one of the unused corridors, wrapped in dust and silence. "I think I might go back to see her tomorrow night," Rowan said quietly, tracing Orion's belt with his quill. "What? Who?" Ollie spluttered. "Doomsayer Doris," Rowan replied. Ollie looked horrified. "You can't. Tomorrow's Halloween. There's a feast. There'll be floating pumpkins and cake the size of your head." "You don't have to come," Rowan said. "I just wanted to ask her some questions." Ollie groaned, rubbing his temples. "Rowan, you can't take advice from portraits who predict everyone's doom." From a few feet away, a soft voice said, "Maybe he just wants to know if she's as crazy as everyone says." Both boys turned. The young Hufflepuff girl, Margot, was sitting cross-legged near the parapet, her telescope forgotten, book open on her knees. The wind stirred her hair as she looked up. "You've seen her?" Rowan asked. "Once," Margot said, not looking up from her page. "She told me I'd never find what I was looking for if I kept staring at walls. I haven't decided if that was deep or rude," Ollie huffed. "Probably both," Margot smiled. "I want to know what's so important that Rowan needs to miss the Halloween feast to go and speak to a crazy old painting." "It's none of your business," Ollie told her, turning him and Rowan away towards the sky. "But I still think you're mad," Ollie said under his breath to Rowan. "Maybe," Rowan said, glancing once more at the stars, "but I'll find out for sure tomorrow night." Margot had gone back to her book unbothered for an answer, and Rowan and Ollie continued to map the stars whilst Ollie tried to convince Rowan not to go. The next night arrived, and the great hall was alive with laughter and candlelight. The smell of roasted pumpkin and treacle tart drifted all the way up the marble staircase, and Rowan could hear Ollie's unmistakable laugh echoing somewhere in the distance. But Rowan wasn't at the feast. His footsteps sounded lonely in the corridor as he made his way toward the disused wing where Doomsayer Doris had been rehung after her incident. The torches here burned lower, and the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and forgotten things. The portraits he passed were all asleep, or pretending to be. Only one or two cracked open painted eyes to peer at him as he went by, their whispers following him down the hall. Rowan felt quite uneasy. He didn't know if it was because it was the fact that he was walking around a castle all alone on Halloween, or maybe the fact he was on his way to speak to a painting that may or may not be absolutely insane. By the time he reached the staircase leading toward the lower floors, the air had cooled again, the stone walls holding on to the chill of October night. That was when he heard it. A soft sound, not a whisper this time, a sob. Rowan slowed. The sound came from just ahead, from behind a closed door to the girls' toilet set into the corner of the corridor. A faint light glowed beneath it, spilling thinly across the stone floor. Another quiet sob followed. Rowan stopped a few steps away. He didn't move any closer, didn't knock, didn't speak. He just stood there, uncertain, listening to the quiet, uneven rhythm of someone trying not to cry and failing. Rowan shifted his weight. He could say something, should say something, ask if they were all right. But the words caught somewhere in his throat, and then that feeling again, faint, pulling, like something deep in the castle had noticed him standing still. Rowan glanced down the corridor. The shadows stretched long and silent, waiting. He clutched his wand, though he didn't know what he'd do with it if anything happened. When he turned the final corner, the corridor was darker still. The only light came from a single torch sputtering weakly beside a large, dust-covered frame. There she was. Doomsayer Doris had been moved to the very end of the hall by no other than Rowan and Ollie themselves, a small brass plaque below her portrait now reading, "Temporarily relocated pending review." She was a frail, silver-haired witch wrapped in a shawl of stars, her eyes large and moon-bright. Her expression, even in stillness, carried the faintest air of amusement, as if she knew something you didn't, and was waiting for you to realize it. When Rowan stepped closer, her head turned slowly. "I was wondering when you'd come back," she said softly. Rowan nearly dropped his wand. You were?" Her painted hand brushed the edge of her shawl. "You shouldn't be here, young badger. Not tonight." Rowan hesitated. "You said something the other night, about the boy who hears what others do not, and that the echo wasn't done with him yet. What did you mean?" The portrait sighed, a soft, weary sound like wind through an open window. "Words are dangerous things when spoken before their time," she murmured. "You do well to forget them." "But I can't," Rowan said. "Please, I think you told me for a reason." For a long moment Doris was silent. Only the torch beside her flickered, and the shadows on her painted shawl seemed to move. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost kind. "We all seek ourselves in the future, child. You will not find your answers here." Rowan frowned. "Then where?" Her painted eyes shifted, as if looking beyond him, through walls and time itself. "You will not find the answers you seek here, but if you must know, then go to the room where lost things go," she said finally. "A place that changes with need. When the time comes, it will open to you. But be warned." Her voice lowered to a trembling whisper. "Some things are lost for a reason." A sudden cold gust snuffed the torch beside her. Rowan's breath fogged in the dark. When he blinked, Doris was nowhere to be seen in her frame. "Brilliant," Rowan muttered, trying to steady his nerves. "Talking riddles. Perfectly normal conversation." Rowan turned to leave, the words, "a room where lost things go," still echoing in his mind. The corridor seemed colder now, as if Doris's whisper had drawn the warmth right out of the stones. He glanced back once more at the portrait. She was still nowhere in sight. Before he had time to think, something tugged sharply at his sleeve. Rowan stumbled, nearly losing his footing as he was pulled backwards. He was dragged up the stairs before he could react. his boots scraping against the stone. When he finally wrenched free and turned, breath catching, the strange girl, Margot, stood there, slightly out of breath, her grip still half raised as if ready to grab him again. "What are you doing?" Rowan asked, adjusting his robes. "No time to explain," she said quickly. "We need to get back to the common room now." There was something in her voice, urgent, sharp enough that Rowan didn't argue. He nodded. They moved quickly through the corridor, footsteps echoing softly against the stone. The castle at night felt different now. The walls seemed to listen. The suits of armour creaked as though turning their heads to watch them pass, and the portraits whispered faintly in voices too low to make out. As they reached the corner leading toward the main staircase, a sound stopped them both. Wet, dragging. They froze. The smell reached them next. Damp, rotting, wrong. It came again, heavier this time. Rowan and Margot exchanged a glance. Slowly, carefully, they edged closer and peered around the corner. Torchlight flickered along the corridor below, jerking unevenly across the walls. Then, something moved. A huge arm, mottled and rough, swung lazily into the light. Rowan's breath caught in his throat. Margot clapped a hand over his mouth, pulling him back into the shadows before he could make a sound. They watched. The creature lurched forward, massive, towering, its footsteps shaking the stone beneath it. In one hand it dragged a club so large it scraped loudly against the floor. Rowan's mind struggled to make sense of it. Then it turned slightly, and he saw its face. A troll. The largest thing he had ever seen. Its eyes were small and wild, its skin thick and grey, its breath heavy and foul. For a moment it paused. Rowan's heart hammered so loudly he was certain it could hear it. The troll's gaze swept across the corridor, past them. Then, with a slow, lumbering movement, it ducked its head and smashed through a nearby doorway, disappearing into the darkness beyond. The sound of splintering wood echoed long after it had gone. Silence followed, heavy, unreal. Rowan stood frozen, his mind lagging behind what he'd just seen, like if he didn't fully understand it, it might not be real. He looked at Margot. She looked back. They didn't need to say anything. They ran. They didn't stop until they had rounded 5 corners, lungs burning, footsteps echoing wildly through the corridors. Somewhere in the distance shouting had begun. Doors slammed. Voices rose. Prefects barked orders. The castle was awake. Rowan bent slightly, catching his breath. "Why weren't you at the feast?" he asked between breaths. Margot pushed her hair back, still scanning the corridor behind them. "Professor Quirrell came running into the Great Hall," she said, "shouting about a troll in the castle. I knew you'd gone to see that portrait, so I came to find you." Rowan blinked. "Thanks," he said. She shrugged. "Don't mention it. Just hope whatever she said was worth nearly getting flattened." Rowan let out a breath. "Not really," he admitted. "I think she's just as mad as everyone says, talking in riddles." Margot gave a small, knowing nod. "Yeah, sounds about right." She straightened. "Come on, let's get back before we run into that thing again." They moved quickly, slipping down back staircases and through narrow corridors toward the basement. Twice they ducked into alcoves as teachers rushed past. Professor Flitwick hurrying one way, Snape striding grimly the other. By the time they reached the Hufflepuff corridor, Rowan's heart was still hammering. Margot tapped the barrel in the correct rhythm with shaking fingers. The lid sprang open. They stumbled inside, straight into chaos. "Rowan!" Ollie was on his feet instantly. "Where have you been?" Every head in the common room turned. Students crowded together in their pyjamas, faces pale in the firelight. Cedric stood near the fireplace with Professor Sprout, who looked both relieved and furious. Rowan started, glancing at Margot. "We got turned around coming back from the library." Ollie narrowed his eyes, obviously not believing a word, but he didn't say anything. "You're mental," he said instead. "The whole castle's in lockdown. There's a troll in the dungeons." "I know," Rowan said before he could stop himself. The room went quiet. Professor Sprout hurried over. "Mr. Barrows? Miss Vance," she said, her voice tight. "You're very lucky you weren't caught in the corridors. We were about to send a search party." "Sorry, Professor," Rowan muttered. Margot had already slipped away into the crowd. Rowan almost envied her. Sprout sighed. "You'll stay here. No one leaves until we're told. Understood?" Rowan nodded. Ollie shoved him lightly toward the armchairs. "You gave everyone a fright," he muttered. Then quieter. "Told you it was a bad idea." Rowan sank into the chair by the fire. He didn't argue, because this time Ollie was right. Rowan sank into a chair, still shaking. The room buzzed with nervous talk. Someone swore they'd heard the troll's footsteps near the kitchens. Someone else insisted a teacher had already knocked it out. Above it all, Cedric was trying to keep order, voice steady, eyes flicking constantly to the door. The fire cracked loudly, making several first years jump. Rowan barely noticed. He was staring into the flames, hearing the echo of the troll, and the memory of the strange riddle that doomsayer Doris had said. Ollie slumped beside him, rubbing his eyes. "Think we'll get any sleep tonight?" Rowan shook his head slowly. "Doubt it." For a long time neither spoke. The castle above them seemed to sigh and settle, the muffled sounds of panic slowly fading into uneasy silence. When Rowan finally did drift into sleep, head resting on his arm by the dying fire, he dreamed of dark corridors and a great door hidden behind walls, and a faint, faraway voice whispering from beyond it, "Seek the room where lost things go." The castle looked almost normal again the next morning. Almost. There was still a faint scorch mark along one corridor, and the air smelled slightly of burnt wood and potion smoke. Teachers were whispering in corners, portraits chattered anxiously from frame to frame, and the suits of armour creaked with self-importance. Rowan had hardly slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the distant growl again, saw the torchlight flare along the walls, felt Margot's hand pulling him by the sleeve. When he dragged himself to breakfast, Ollie was already at the table, halfway through a bowl of porridge and gesturing wildly as he told Justin and Zacharias everything he hadn't actually seen. Massive thing, I tell you. Must have been twice as tall as Hagrid. Probably smelled worse too. Rowan here nearly fainted. "I did not," Rowan muttered, sitting down. Cedric looked up from his plate further down the table, grinning. "Give him a break, Ollie. I heard you were hiding behind a chair when Sprout came back." "I was strategically shielding myself," Ollie said primly, which set the table laughing and made the tension crack just a little. The laughter died quickly, though, as talk drifted down the table. Everyone, it seemed, was whispering about the same thing. "They say Potter and one of them Weasleys took on the troll themselves." Rowan looked up. "They fought it." Justin nodded solemnly as if repeating Holy Writ. "In the girls' bathroom. Locked it in there and knocked it out cold. Whole school's talking about it." Ollie whistled low. "Blimey." Cedric gave Rowan a wry smile. "Guess you picked the wrong corridor for adventure." The great hall was alive with noise again, the clatter of plates, the flap of owl wings overhead. And yet, for all the bustle, Rowan felt oddly quiet inside. As they left for lessons, Ollie elbowed him playfully. "Don't look so gloomy, mate. We survived a troll attack. That's practically heroic." "Yeah," Rowan said, forcing a small smile. "Practically."